Hey everyone, welcome back to Building Bridges with Greg Johnson. Now, if you've followed our podcast in the past, you realize we started this in about November of 2019. And then we brought it to a close in January of 2021, about 9 months ago. And that was because I was taking some time to reflect and examine the value of this podcast and the materials that we were covering and the content we were discussing, and some personal things that I was dealing with in my own life. Well, I'm happy to announce that today, with some new changes, we are back and hopefully have something to contribute once again to the Building Bridges philosophy of ministry. And the key difference to this is that we're going to change the name of this podcast. The podcast is no longer Building Bridges with Greg Johnson, but rather it's called Building Bridges with Greg and Jill. That's right. My wife is now fully on board with this podcast, and it is a partnership between the two of us to talk about things that will help you hopefully be a better bridge builder yourself, and to examine things that we have experienced and that we have been challenged by in our own lives and in our own experiences to share with you as an audience. So we're really, really excited about some new developments and some new things that we want you to know about. And I could not be more thrilled than to introduce and to say hello and welcome my wife, Jill Johnson, to the Building Bridges with Greg and Jill program. Jill, it's wonderful to have you. Thanks for being a part of the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here. You'll have to be a little bit forgiving of me because I've never done this kind of thing before, but I'm excited to be a part of it. And it's been quite a journey getting to this place for us.
It absolutely has been. And in the 9 months that we've been off the podcast scene, we've been doing a lot of personal growing and things that we've been working on. And that's really going to be the topic of our first comeback podcast. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I just want you to know how grateful I am that you're willing to give this a shot. I think in the philosophy of our ministry, which we have led now for over 20 years, standing together, we're actually doing that better today than we've ever done that. And this is an illustration that you and I are standing together to do this podcast, and that in more ways than that, and in increasing ways, hopefully in the future, you and I are partnering side by side to do the thing that we do here in Utah, which is to help evangelical Christian churches stand together and be more effective in working together and knowing one another and praying together to bring transformational truth to the culture in which we live. So that is just thrilling to me, and I think you're going to do great, and I think together we're going to be better than the old version of our podcast ever was. So welcome aboard.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
I said earlier, it's been a journey to get to this place. And really, as you hear our story, you will see that it's really a miracle that we are standing together today.
Yeah.
We have been through some really difficult days in the last several years, and it's been amazing to see what God has done. You know, when you and I first met, we were in college.
Yep.
And we had a lot of mutual friends, and I actually married a friend of yours.
Right.
And when Greg and I married, it was after some very difficult things in my life. I had lost my first husband in a car accident, and I was pregnant at the time. And Greg and a group of his friends had gotten together to memorialize my first husband, and what they ended up doing was each one of them took a month over the next, was it 14
About 15 months?
15
there was
months.
15 of us, yeah.
And each one of them would take that month, they would call me, they would pray for me, they would let the other guys know what was going on with me. Some of them sent letters. It was such a precious just way to memorialize my first husband and to care for me. And I had a little baby at the time, and so just some very difficult days, but God used that time and those men encouraging me and loving me, and eventually He brought our hearts together.
That's right.
About a year and a half later.
Yeah.
So difficult way to start a marriage, to already have a child, and to already been married before.
Well, I mean, it was on the in the context of great emotional grief for you, having lost a husband in the early years of marriage, to being pregnant and then giving birth after his passing 6 months later. So, I mean, you went through so much at that time. And as myself and the other guys from the old Westmont Warrior basketball team came alongside of you, and as you rightly said, something happened between you and I where God began to uniquely form our hearts together. It just seemed so clear at that time that God himself was doing something that was way beyond your agenda or my agenda, and he was bringing us together. And as that occurred in this beautiful and spiritual way, we felt like we had kind of an amazing start to a miraculous coming together. And yet in ministry, living in ministry in Utah, which is a challenging thing anywhere, but particularly here in Utah, as Christian missionaries and ministry leaders, something began to creep into our marriage that was eventually pretty seriously negative.
Yeah, it made it feel really difficult because I wondered, it felt like God gave us this beautiful story and this really amazing thing, and we were going to do ministry together. And I had always wanted to be in ministry. And when it didn't go the way that I thought it would go, there was a tendency to feel like, okay, God, what are you doing here? What's going on? Yeah. And the ministry kind of started to take over for you, and for me. We kind of went our own ways with I'm taking care of little kids and feeling neglected because so many big things are going on in the ministry, and I'm at the same time of wanting to kind of fan the flames of your giftings and the things that you were good at and the connections that you had, also feeling pretty lonely at home and not really a part of the things that were going on with you.
Yeah. Well, let me just interrupt briefly to kind of come back to our audience and just say, so today, as we welcome back the Building Bridges podcast, now with Greg and Jill and not just with Greg alone, we feel the need to begin this new podcast journey by sharing a very recent story of what God's been doing in our lives and in our marriage and in our family. And while this is probably going to be pretty vulnerable and maybe a little raw, I think the best way that we can illustrate being bridge builders in our ministry and what we're all about here in Utah is to basically confess that we need to be bridge builders even in our own marriage and in our relationship, because something happened last year that really brought all of the things that Jill was talking about, this increasing distance between her and I as a husband and a wife and as a father and a mother. And the more that subtly happened over time, it began to get thinner and thinner, or the ice did, of our marriage and our relationship. And so up until about August of 2020, we were just kind of bumping along, not doing too well. I was spending a lot of time focusing on the ministry of Standing Together, the work that we were doing here with building Christian unity among the churches of Utah and the Wasatch Front, finding myself more and more getting the drug of affirmation, more and more of finding my significance in ministry. I don't want to minimize the seriousness of it, but I think it's fair to say many pastors and men and women can find themselves drawing their significance, their importance, their value from what they do and not necessarily who they are. And I think that can be incredibly subtle. So what happened up until about August of last year is that we were just kind of allowing things to continue to deteriorate in our marriage and in our family. And in particular, I'm guilty of that. I was the one that was not leading well in our home. I wasn't serving my family well. I wasn't conscientious of Jill. And I was letting my ministry, this thing that God had given me, which I thought was so wonderful and so amazing, become far more important to me, not only just than Jill or my family, but really it began to replace my relationship with God, because that's my identity. That's who I am. That's where I get all the encouragement. That's where I get all my significance. And it doesn't take too long before a wife and a family feel neglected enough that something will break. And that's what happened, Jill. That's kind of the pre-story of what happened as you finally made a decision to, bring our marriage into a place of correction.
Yeah, I had several years of just really losing my voice and losing who God created me to be. And I so feared conflict, and I was a people pleaser. And so when there would be conflict between us, or when you would make decisions where I felt the ministry was a priority over the family, I would just kind of lose myself in that, and I didn't figure out a way to talk with you about those things that worked for us. It seemed to always cause conflict. And so things came to a head in August, and I had been praying for quite some time about really just praying for a miracle, and didn't know what to do myself. I had been reading a ton of books and talking to just a couple of friends. I tried to protect things, and I didn't want to shed light on how difficult it was, which I think happens a lot in the Christian community, where we think nobody else is suffering like I am. And I want people to think that things are good, that things are going well at home. And so I didn't really talk to a lot of people about it. And that just made it harder, because I felt pretty isolated. Things got so bad that I felt Greg had asked me for a separation at some point, and then we had decided that we wanted to separate with a purpose. And so we ended up, the girls and I ended up moving out of the home. And I really felt during that time that God started to show me a bit of who He created me to be, and I began to realize that He could really use this as a time to help me to grow and to learn who He created me to be in my independence, where I didn't have you in the same home as me, is really where I began to see the giftings that God had given me and become a little bit alive, which was surprising to me, because it was a very difficult time just because of our circumstances. I still wanted to be in ministry. I wanted to do ministry with you, but I just didn't see how we could move forward with that in any way. And so I began to think of my life separate from you.
Well, and just hearing that from you, even knowing the journey that we've been on, it pains me deeply to know that someone who really was known in this community over the last 20 or 30 years of being in ministry as a bridge builder, as a person who knew how to foster relationship and engage people kindly and civilly and graciously, and building bridges with Mormon leaders and scholars and students, and building bridges with people in our community, political leaders and various others. The guy that was doing all that was neglecting the most essential bridge, the family bridge, the marriage bridge of his life. And I just want to, I'm going to just keep saying this because I know it's real for me, that not only do I grieve over that, and I confess that as sin in my life, I just realized just how subtle and insidious the very things that we say we believe as Christians, that we believe in marriage, we believe in family, we believe in loving one another, we believe in caring for one another. Here I was kind of not even aware, blinded in a way, hard-hearted in a way, to not acknowledge that the more I gravitated towards a drug or the addiction of ministry, the more that I felt that you didn't love me as much as the ministry loved me. You didn't affirm me as much as the ministry affirmed me. I began to pull away and kind of violated everything I believed in in terms of being a bridge builder myself in the very most essential relationship. And I just want to tell our audience, if you struggle in your marriage, or you struggle in some of the most intimate relationships of your life, but you're a nice person at your work, and you're a great person in the community, and people love you in your neighborhood, and yet your marriage and your family is not going so well, that needs to be a warning flag. That needs to be an alert signal that there's something incongruent about the person you're seen as outside of the home and someone that you are in the home. And it doesn't mean that you're a terrible, no good person, but it does mean that there's something you need to begin to examine, and that you need to sit down with your spouse and begin to understand. Because, Jill, I think you and I both believe this. There is an enemy. He is the enemy of Jesus Christ, and he's the enemy of everyone who follows Jesus Christ. And I'll tell you, if I've learned anything over the last year, I believe that spiritual warfare is as real today as it was in the days of Jesus, when we read in the Gospels that he cast out demons and dealt with demonic spirits. I think that the enemy of my life, who is, the devil, Lucifer, referred to many times in Scripture in various ways, allowed me to hold on to an idol, and allowed me to kind of get captivated by what made me feel significant, so that I became blinded to the most important relationship I have on this earth, which, outside of my relationship with God and Jesus Christ as my Savior, it's you. And yet I was being blinded and beginning to, living not for days and weeks and months, but for years, more and more apart from you. And so when that time came in August of 2019,
2020.
I'm sorry, 2020. Yeah, correct. When that time came, my initial reaction, and probably for the first 5 months, taking the heartbreak of Thanksgiving and Christmas and separation of family during that very, very special time of year, that I had to really be broken to understand that it wasn't just you being you, and me allowing myself to kind of judge you and dismiss you and to think poorly of you for leaving the home and all this separation stuff. I mean, as you said earlier, I'm the one that made the initial suggestion. I'm the one that said, maybe, Jill, we just need to separate. And I was doing it punitively. I was doing it arrogantly. I was doing it rudely in an attempt to manipulate you and to scare you. And then I think you remarkably said basically to me, well, this was your suggestion, and things aren't getting any better, so maybe it's time to do this. And you did it, and my reaction was pretty hard-hearted, pretty blinded, and I dismissed that this was my issue or my fault. And I don't know what you look back on in terms of that first 5 months, but I just look back from August to the end of the year as a place that, until I was really, really ready to look in the mirror, God was not going to put this thing back together, but he was going to allow things to go from bad to worse, from dark to darker. And I came to a place that I think really in early November and late November around Thanksgiving, that I realized, wait a minute, this is bad and it's not going the right way. And it's time for me to look inward. And it took me even another month, and the deep pains of missing out on Christmas and Christmas Eve with you. And as you know, and I would say this to our audience, if you want to know pain, experience a lonely Christmas without the people that are the most important people to you on this planet. Be separated from your spouse, be separated from your children. I'm not asking you to, I'm not asking anyone to sympathize for me, because it was really consequential at that time. And I really believe that whom the Lord loves, he disciplines. And that the Lord loves a contrite heart, as it says in Psalm 51. So I needed to go through a hard time. And I don't like to admit that, but until I did, and then until I was broken enough to see this need to really look inwardly, I don't think our marriage could get back on track. And at that time, at Christmas of 2020, almost a year ago, it wasn't clear that it was going to go back on track or ever get back on track. And it was that bleak, that hard, that dark, that painful. And, the journey that you mentioned at the beginning of our podcast was only halfway through. And I didn't realize how hard it was going to be to begin to see God put the pieces back together, with no guarantee that it was going to happen, or no guarantee that it was going to happen in any context of my timetable. So, before we move into that second part of the journey in our separation, which lasted 10 months, and here I am leading a ministry, not even understanding, if I should be, because for those first 5 months, it's how I provided for us and how I, functioned. And so I was just kind of keeping, things together the best we could, with the idea of we got to figure out what's going to happen in the family before we can decide what's going to happen with standing together. So,
yeah, during that time, there was so many God stories, and we don't have enough time to share all of them. But I remember just all the people, and there were so many parts of the body of Christ that really cared for me and cared for our girls during that time in so many different ways, meeting with me, giving us money, helping us to find a place to live. There was a couple that just would invite me over to play games and have dinner with them once a week, and different things like that, where I just felt like there was such a great picture of the body of Christ coming together to care for us. And here I was afraid that people would just have this kind of Christian perspective of, if you separate, well, that just means that you're going to get divorced, and maybe I'm looking for somebody else or something like that. And that was never on my mind. And I do give God the glory for that. He walked with me through every day. There was a time when he gave me a vision of Jesus just kneeling down by a stream and picking up one pebble at a time. And he was doing something in his hand with each pebble before he would put it down. And I asked the Lord specifically, what is that vision and what does that mean? And he just showed me that this was going to be a difficult season, and there were going to be a lot of really difficult things that came into my life, and that God already knew what they were, and he was going to take care of them for me, and that I didn't have to worry. And I really held on to that the whole time that we were separated. And every time something came, I knew that God already knew about it, and he was taking care of it, and I didn't have to worry about it. Mm-hmm. And that just helped my journey quite a bit, both that and the people caring for me during that time.
And I would just echo that. One of the things that we've been able to do even since our reunion, we'll get to that in a minute, but in the aftermath of what God has been doing, we've been able to share with many pastors along the Wasatch Front who have been a part of Standing Together for years, that they came around to us, and whether they knew you or knew me or knew both of us, they were praying for us, they were believing in us, they were supporting us and spending time with me and counseling me and encouraging me in a lot of different ways. And it's really remarkable. We have said to them that the whole idea of Standing Together being a bridge building ministry, and the whole idea of helping people come together that have differences of opinion and different understanding, different theology, that we can't discuss those things. We can't be there for one another without an investment. We have to get onto the bridge. We have to cross the bridge. We have to meet in the middle. And so many times when we need it most, when we need that compassion, when we need that support, when we need that love from others, it's not there for us because we've been isolated. We haven't invested in other relationships. We haven't taken the time and done the work to just create friendships. And so much of what bridge building is about is investing over, long periods of time, respectful, civil, conversational dialogue. And so we were the beneficiaries of an investment of our own ministry that had been being built for 20 years. That one pastor said to me early on, you've been caring for a lot of us pastors for a long time, Greg, and now as you and Jill go through this tough time, we're going to care for you.
Such
and I was blown away.
Yeah,
blown away
such a
by
blessing to us.
Because I too felt like, boy, if anybody finds out that Jill and I are separated, if they find out that things are not all well in the Johnson home, that's an end. That's the end of the ministry. That's the end of my vocation. That's the end of our support. How do we continue on? And the devil was putting a lot of those fearful thoughts into my head, just like he was putting into yours about, what are people going to think about this or that. So I think as we wrapped up the year last year, things were as dark and as rough as they could be, at least for me. And I felt like I never knew what a panic attack was, but I think I had multiple ones in the month of December. Even talked with a doctor friend of mine. And he said, yeah, I think that sounds like a panic attack, when the world feels like it's all falling in on you. And a dear, dear friend, David Kuykendall from Kentucky, talked with me near New Year's Eve. It was, I think, the Tuesday before. And he said, you need to talk with a friend of mine named Ken Smiley. And I said, who's that? And he said, well, he's a counselor, and he's from Florida, and he's been helping me in my life. And I want to pay for the first session that you guys have because, if you don't want to do it more than once, that's great. But I think Ken can really help. And Ken Smiley was the face of Jesus to me when I needed that particular face the most. And as you know, as we kind of broke from December, the very last Wednesday night of December of 2020, I met Ken for the first time. He was a 73-year-old man who I would only learn 3 weeks later was 18 years prior in my same boat, a boat where he lost his marriage and his ministry as a pastor because he too had violated the most sacred responsibility of any of us, is to love our wife and our children. And because he got so caught up in that, his marriage was lost, and his ministry was ultimately lost. And I realized now I was talking to somebody who knew my story, who knew me. He knew me as well as I knew myself, and probably better from his perspective. And he was more like a grandfather. He was someone that just would speak to me in such a kindly way. And probably the most profound thing that I could say that I got out of the continued ongoing counseling with Ken was that he began with the most profound and most simple statement, and I share it with all of you. He said in the very first time that we got together, Greg, I hope you know that this really is not ultimately about you and Jill. This is ultimately about you and Jesus. And I said, Ken, Jesus and I are fine. I love Jesus. Jesus loves me. He died on the cross for me. I know that. I believe that. I'm going to heaven. I think things are okay with Jesus and I. The problem is Jill and I. And he just very tenderly pulled back the one layer of the onion after another and said, no, you see, if your relationship with Jesus was right, then this problem with Jill would not be what it is. Yes, Christian marriages have conflict. Yes, Christian marriages, spouses argue. But what was happening in our marriage was fundamentally deeper than that. And it was a cancer.
Yeah. And one of the things that somebody else a couple in our lives did for us is they introduced us to a concept called conciliation. And there was a woman that did Christian conciliation, and we started talking about doing that after Greg had some changes in his life and his heart became soft. And one of the things that we did as part of this conciliation was we chose 5 individuals to walk with us, and we made a huge commitment to it was really just a week for the conciliation to meet together. We met for 10 hours every day for 5 days, and so this was a huge commitment that these 5 people made for us.
Absolutely amazing.
And the conciliator just walked through our lives with us. We shared our stories. We came up with issues that needed to be dealt with. Of course, there's a lot of details there that we're leaving off, but and one of the things that the conciliator said in this process is that my secret sauce, was the way that she said it, is the care team.
Yeah.
And basically this care team sitting through that whole week with us and experiencing that with us, they then have been walking with us.
And still are.
Yes,
Yeah.
and they agreed to walk with us for a year.
Yeah.
And so we meet with one couple the first half of the month, another couple the second half of the month, and then the women meet together and the men meet together, and they're just walking through this season with us. That time with the conciliator brought healing. One of the things she said is after this week, you will have the benefit of having 8 years of counseling.
Yeah, because you jam like a fire hydrant, almost drinking out of a fire hydrant, as they say, months and months of counseling into a 1 week period of time. And I liken it unto a bit of a spiritual rotorooter, just a total internal cleaning, where everything that you can possibly examine in your life, in the company of these dear Christian couples and people that we were meeting with, as well as the professional and spiritual insight of Judy and her assistant. It was painful. It was hard. We had to prepare for about 2 months. We had to read a book. We had to do a lot of homework. We had to do a lot of preparation. We were fostering some beginnings of getting back together and spending a little bit of time together and having some dates and interactions with others. And but as hard as December was, the beginning, the crack of hope that began to emerge as God began to reveal that He does have the miracle power to put broken things back together. And folks, again, we want you to be inspired by that. I mean, our story is our story. But if we could tell you anything, it would be that a broken marriage does not have to be a destroyed marriage. A very broken marriage does not ultimately have to be an ended marriage, because God can put back together dead things and resurrect them out of darkness and death and destruction, just like He did through His own resurrection. And we are the recipients. And I think, Jill, it was a twofold miracle. A miracle of God softening my heart and giving me a new heart for you and a new set of eyes to see you and myself. But I also think that He gave us a miracle in your willingness to open up and to trust and to begin to believe that maybe I could be a different father, a different husband, a different man in the Lord. And so that process of the conciliation and the secret sauce of these wonderful couples and the individual that walk with us, that has taken place since March of this last year, and the continuation of beginning to believe that God was restoring this thing, so that as April turned into May and May turned into June, it was at that time, and it was remarkable because our kids were a part of all this, and it was painful for them, hard for them, from all the holiday stuff on and the separation and the journey, and believe me, folks, again, it's very hard to kind of air all this stuff in a podcast, but the reason that we're doing it is because this is what motivates us to bring the podcast back. That there might be a way to share our story and other insights that we've learned as a couple and as not only a married couple that are doing life together and trying to figure out marriage and family, but now, and having done, but very, very much more intentionally now doing ministry together. We feel like we might have something valuable to share through our honest and vulnerable experiences. And I can just say that as I got that phone call on May 31st from you, as I was taking our son off to a great summer experience he was about to have at Kidder Creek Adventure Camp out in Northern California. And that night, as I dropped him off and began to drive to your folks' house to spend the night, I heard from you, and it was a conversation I'll never forget, and I won't talk too much about it because I'll probably cry, but you let me know that you had heard from the Lord that it was time to come home and that you and the girls would be home when I got back. And I said, well, should I drive home right now? And you said, no, I want you to give us a little transition time and give us some time to move back into the house, and when you're home, when you get home on Saturday, we'll be here. And what a remarkable day that was, June 5th. It's like our second anniversary. We're married on June 20th of 1998, and now we have a second anniversary to celebrate June 5th of that time where God put a very broken marriage back together. Now, we have, as we wrap up things tonight, as we interact over this story that we've been telling, I think that we want to kind of summarize what God's been doing over the last 5 months as well. I mean, it's one thing to look at what our marriage was like before the separation, the first 5 months, the second 5 months of the separation, and that total package of 10 months. But God's been doing some really cool things. But it doesn't mean that it's just this blissful, wonderful, easy journey back to full restoration. It's a process in and of itself.
One of the things that was really helpful for me to learn, and I don't know why I wouldn't have known this before, but just that every couple has conflict, and it's really the way that you work it out, the way that you deal with it and handle with it. And I think in the past, I would have kind of hidden from that and not wanted to work it out and talk about it. And so we've gotten some great tools, but I think ultimately it is the miracle that God gave us, and our relationship is so very different. I feel loved. I feel, that God is just continuing to work and continuing to bring healing. Oftentimes we'll use the word PTSD there's a little bit of a trigger from something that used to be part of our past, but we're able to communicate about that and continue to lift things up to the Lord in prayer. And I'm just excited about this new season of doing ministry with you. And I'm sure there'll be some bumps along the way, but I feel like that our relationship has been restored, and not only restored, but made new.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see how that plays out with our ministry and the people that God puts before us and the open doors that we see.
Yeah. It was remarkable. Ken often shares with me the idea that God is in the building, restoring and fixing broken things business, and he mends us to send us. He fixes us to use us for his glory. And in a very different kind of way than I used to think, I find myself understanding that what God has done in my life and in your life and in our marriage and in our family has brought him glory. But I really do believe, and I say this humbly and very carefully, that our story may be an example that could help and encourage someone else. And we would want pastors, we would want spiritual leaders in local churches, we would want just average people in churches and in the Christian community in particular. But as anybody would else, possibly listen to this podcast, we'd want them to know that there is no such thing as this perfect Leave It to Beaver, the old TV show from the 50s, kind of understanding of marriage and family, that real marriages have real problems. And we've been reading from Dr. John Gottman's books, The Science of Trust, and the second one what's it called? The 7 Principles or 7 Markers of a Good Marriage or something like that.
Something like that.
But Dr. Gottman is a scholar of relationship. He's a scholar of marriage and has studied it for 40 years. In all of its components, and has brought such interesting insight to us about how to have a healthy relationship and to truly be there for one another and build it on friendship and love and allowing that to be very much a dynamic of ongoing daily interaction. All that to say is that if there's a way that I could summarize the gifts that God have given us, we've had a deeper walk with him. Certainly, a renewed love for one another that it just blows me away. There are times when I get to hold Jill's hand, or we're walking and on a walk or doing something, and I just look over at you and I'll say, you were my wife for 23 years, and for so many years of that period of time, I neglected and did not cherish and did not value you, and yet you were as close to me as you are now. I could have held your hand before. I could have enjoyed our relationship more. I could have experienced more of life together with you, but I didn't. And now to reach out and hold your hand, or to have a date night or a conversation with you, and I just find myself saying, well, why didn't I cherish this before? What was I missing? It's so wonderful now. It's so incredible. And I know there are men and women out there that are so disappointed and so frustrated and so hurt and so broken by their relationship that they're saying, there's no way I could love him again. He has violated, he has hurt, he has abused me, he is this, whatever. And I get it. I totally get it. And there's some men out there that say, I could never love her again. She's so difficult, she's so hard, she's so whatever. But I'm telling you, with God, all things are possible. And God is the one who says, that's your blindness speaking. That's your hard heart speaking. That's not me speaking. You watch what I can do. I mean, Jesus took a little boy's lunch, 5 pieces of bread and 2 fish, and he turned it into a feeding festival of 5,000 plus people.
That miracle has been really important in this journey for us, because we came to the Lord so broken and didn't have a whole lot to give him. But we came to him and were faithful and obedient, and he multiplied that and did so much for us. So it was so miraculous to see.
And I just want to say to our those listening to us today, we're not anybody's object lesson. We're not trying to say that because of what he did for us and how he did it through us and all that is exactly how God might work in another situation. But we do want to be honest and real and true to our passion of being bridge builders, to say, hey, if somehow what we're sharing with you can resonate and help you to believe that God can restore something as intimate and as important as your marriage and your family, believe him, trust him, know that he is there for you. I love the scripture in Philippians 1:6. He who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it. God does not leave us. He does not forsake us. He has given us power. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. So we just want to bring this to an end. We want to thank you for joining us on our inaugural Building Bridges with Greg and Jill podcast. We want you to be reminded that the key to being a bridge builder is friendship and relationship, where we enter into relationships with people that are different than ourselves to try to understand and to communicate in a gracious, kind, loving, civil way, an honest way. And we hope that that's a blessing to you as you listen to our story today and as we share other ideas and stories about bridge building in the months to come. So welcome aboard. Thanks so much for joining us. And we're going to see you next time on the new Building Bridges with Greg and Jill.